Welcome, welcome to the Nale Yoga Podcast, the podcast with Yoga Nidra journeys for deep rest and more. Today's episode focuses on more because instead of having a guided journey, we're going to be talking to a very special guest, Andrea Longini. And I'm super excited for us to have her on the show because Andrea has been one of the people that's inspired me for many years that I've really learned a lot from. And I'm excited for all of us together to learn from her as well. Andrea has studied linguistics and rhetoric, and she's had a career in the communication space for over 15 years. She's a real pioneer in and has a real gift for breaking it down artificial barriers between different groups of people and building communities. And this applies to the practice of Yoga Nidra because we all have a story to tell, and our experience in life is shaped by the story that we tell ourselves. So I'm excited for us to hear about Andrea's story and to really talk about how we can use the power of communication, balancing speech and silence, and combining that with the power of the Yoga Nidra practice to create the story that we want our lives to be. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Ruthie. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on. Do you want to introduce yourself in a few words as we get started?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Ruthie, for that beautiful introduction. I can assure you, I feel the exact same way about you and how you've inspired me over the years with your professional and personal knowledge and expertise. I always feel like I learn something or enjoy our conversations and get a lot out of our time together. So I feel it's very reciprocal and we complement each other too in our skill sets. And that's why I'm excited about this conversation, because we're going to be talking about topics where I do have professional and academic experience. And we're also going to be touching on topics where I have life experience, but not as much professional or academic technical experience. And that's where I think you really bring the expertise and the guidance. So with all that said, let's get started.
So let's get started with you sharing a little bit about your experiences with healing silence, with healing from sound, anything that you want to start sharing.
Thank you for that. An example I have that is recent of an encounter with silence versus sound and how the two play off of each other would be in September of this year. I participated in a workshop led by 3 Israeli women, wellness and therapy professionals living here in Silicon Valley, California. One of the professionals, the wellness professionals that was leading the workshop, Limor Goldhaber, is a sound healing artist / practitioner. And she is like the conductor of a symphony at the same time that she is the one playing all of the instruments in that symphony. And so for an hour where all of the participants in the workshop were laying down on yoga mats in silence, she was producing beautiful sounds using traditional and some modern instruments like singing bowls, glass instruments, and many others, wooden instruments as well. And that experience of being still and quiet for an hour and listening to these nonverbal sounds that were meant to heal and address trauma was really a transformative experience for me. When the workshop was over, I noticed that I felt less of a need to talk for quite a while afterwards. And I had a feeling of wholeness and peace in my heart. So I felt like that was a very powerful experience around silence and sound and how they interplay off of each other.
Wow, that's really powerful. Sounds like it was a really meaningful experience for you.
It was memorable.
Yeah. I'm wondering how you metabolized that experience afterwards and whether those effects continued for you or they faded away after a while. Can you share a little bit more about how the sound healing transformed you?
I would say the effects were very pronounced in the few days following the workshop.
Mm.
But like all things, if you're not regularly practicing that or having exposure to that, it does fade away.
Mhm.
So the experience did fade away, but I feel if I were to be doing healing experiences like that on a regular basis, it could have the potential to have a really big impact on me personally.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense because these experiences, the effects are cumulative and they're generative. So even though the effect might fade away, it sounds like for you, it's still left an imprint that can never be taken away. And I'm wondering what you might have to say about how the sound healing that you experience compares with Yoga Nidra. Because in Yoga Nidra, we close our eyes, we lay in stillness, we try to remove as many distractions as possible and enter a state of very deep silence and relaxation. And when we quiet the body, we quiet the mind, then the soul can begin to whisper. I think it was Ram Dass who said, the more time you spend in silence, the more you can hear. Something like that. I'm probably not saying it exactly right, but that's the gist of it. So I'm wondering if you found any of that in the sound healing experience or how you feel the sound healing compares to Yoga Nidra.
I would say that they're similar experiences. I was able to take one of your Yoga Nidra meditations that was a longer one. It was about an hour long.
Mhm.
And it was on a day where I was very tired and I had not gotten any sleep
Mm.
pretty much the night before. And I found the Yoga Nidra to be extremely restorative to me. And it allowed me to function better afterwards. There was just something healing about the silence or the tranquil stillness that was good for the body and the mind.
Yeah.
I should do more of those.
Well, yeah, there's always more we can do, right? The good thing is that it's never a wrong time to do Yoga Nidra. So it's one of these things that you can literally do like any time at the click of a button. You just need yourself and the recording. That's it. So, and a quiet space and you need time. So I guess you need a little bit more than nothing, but you don't need other people. You don't need it doesn't cost anything. You don't need any special paraphernalia. You don't need much to do it.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a pretty low barrier to entry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of why I like it because it's such a restorative and such a powerful practice, especially if it's practiced on a regular basis, then like the sound healing, the effects on the nervous system are cumulative and it's just so accessible to people. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just do this in your house by yourself.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool how we really have all of the resources that we need for healing at our own fingertips. And Yoga Nidra, it doesn't actually do anything special. It gives you the container for you to do your own healing. But the actual Yoga Nidra is not the healing thing. It's just providing you a healing environment. Would you agree with that?
I was going to say that The quote that you brought up from Ram Dass reminds me of another quote that is also part of a traditional wisdom practice that is also around silence and the body. If you don't mind my sharing.
Yeah, can you share it?
Okay, yeah. So, it ties into what we're talking about here. So, this quote is from Pirkei Avot, which, for those who are not familiar, is a tractate of the Jewish Talmud. It's a chapter or tractate that deals with ethics exclusively. And it is chapter 1, verse 17. And it says, speaking about a rabbi, Shimon, his son, says, "All my days I have been raised among the sages, and I have found nothing better for the body than silence." And that's a really powerful statement, because if he grew up among really wise people and even then found nothing better for the body than silence, then how much more so is that true for the rest of us, that we really can take time to reflect. And, commentary on this says that the reason for that is when we are speaking, we're not thinking. You can't do both at the same time.
Okay.
That well. So it's kind of like, it's good to have a balance.
Yeah, totally.
It's good to have a balance in life.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Andrea. What a cool quote. I'm so glad that we're bringing some Torah into this. It's always fun. It's interesting that he said that there's nothing better for the body than silence. Why do you think it says the body and not the body and the soul, or the body and the mind?
I guess, well, as you've been saying since the beginning, Ruthie, that there's a connection between the body and the mind. They are connected. And that starts in our physical activities, and the physical acts that we do inform how we feel spiritually, how we feel psychologically. And so this is a pretty basic starting point to think about, like, how much are you speaking in your life, and about what topics and when, and how does that inform how you feel and who you are, your sense of self, your identity. So that's my interpretation of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, how would you apply it to yourself in terms of like the ratio of silence to speaking?
Well, that's an interesting question for me, because I am a communications professional and I have a master's degree in rhetoric. And the key thing about getting your message across effectively to anyone, any audience, a child, an adult, multiple adults, a class, whatever it is that you have to know your audience. Okay. And in order to know your audience, you have to listen to them first. So silence in the form of listening is a quintessential prerequisite to communicating effectively. They are intimately related. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm having a conversation, or when I'm trying to get a message across or market something effectively, taking the needs of your audience into consideration. And that is done by listening.
So true. So speaking of silence, why don't we do a little demo? Because silence can be one of the hardest things sometimes. Some people say that in yoga, the hardest posture is the resting pose, Shavasana, where you're just laying down, you're not doing anything, you're just being. And I think in our modern life, there's so much pressure to do things, to be productive. And it's so hard to just let go and just be, just exist without expectations, without agendas, without really doing anything. So why don't we go ahead and do a little demo of silence exercise? And our listeners are welcome to join in on this as well. Is this something that you'd be open to?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we're going to do 1 minute of silence. And during this minute, I invite you to just simply notice what the experience is like for you. Bring awareness to how you're experiencing the silence in your body, in your breath, in your mind, in your emotions. If there's any images or any associations that show up for you, we just want to be curious and observe everything like a neutral witness. And that's it. And let's see how it goes, just being in one moment of silence. Okay?
All right.
All right. All right. Our moment of silence begins now. Okay. So the moment of silence is up. So now we can talk again.
Okay.
What did you notice?
Well,
Curious.
I actually thought it was, and this doesn't need to be the case necessarily with every moment of silence, but for me in this case, it was actually productive silence. In the sense of I was thinking about how silence equals potential. And the more you let it gestate in you, the more that potential can come to fruition if you break the silence at the right moment.
Mm.
So you have to like let the silence grow within you, kind of like a plant or some other being. And then when the moment is right, you break that silence and you have something better to say than if you had said it earlier.
That's beautiful. I love what you're saying. Yeah.
How about you?
Oh, I was going to ask you, how do you know when it's the right moment?
Oh, okay. So how do you know when it's the right moment?
Yeah.
That is a very intuitive question. And the answer is also intuitive. And I'm afraid the best answer I can give at this time is it's your own intuition. You have to trust your gut. You have to trust your intuition. You have to be in tune with yourself and say to yourself, is this the right time or not? And how does that feel in your body when your body reacts to that question to yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, I would copy and paste that.
Like you could do a more academic approach, I guess, of like, you could make yourself a 2-column chart of pros and cons. Like, should I break my silence now? Yes or no? Here are the pros. Here are the cons. Do the pros outweigh the cons?
Oh my God, that would drive me crazy.
Yeah, I don't
So
think that's
overthinking
really
it.
realistic. Yeah, it's overthinking.
Yeah,
It's overthinking.
like-
So you don't want to overthink it either.
I know. Imagine if we were doing that in this conversation, making pros and cons charts. What's the pros and cons
take
of
too
saying the
long.
next sentence? I know.
It would be like a 3-hour podcast.
I know. Okay, so you asked me what did I notice with the moment of silence? I was just really aware of my breathing, and I noticed how my breathing was getting longer exhales. And I noticed just more kind of areas relaxing more. I noticed that like some of our breathing was also synchronized, like some of our exhales were synchronized as well, which was kind of cool because that's like mirror neurons at work. And it felt just like a nice reset. We were talking a lot before, and the moment of silence, it just felt very wholesome, like a bookmark to the next chapter. And it felt a little bit short. How did it feel to you in terms of the duration? Like, did it feel kind of like short? Did it feel long? Sometimes 1 minute can feel like an eternity.
It went really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Yeah. Cool. Well, was there anything else you wanted to say about the moment of silence?
Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Okay, cool. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. And we've been talking about how silence is healing and the benefits of silence for the body, for the mind, for the soul. But sometimes silence can also be quite harmful as well. It can be a double-edged sword. So I'm curious, when you think of silence as harmful versus healing, if you've had any experiences when silence was not so great or was very difficult.
Wow, that's a really good question. And I actually have a recent example illustrating that.
Oh, okay.
So, short story, a number of years ago, over 15 years to be more accurate, I had a very severe falling out with a friend. We stopped talking. And I held that pain in silence for a long, long time. And I could feel it kind of eating away at me until I could not hold it in any longer. And so this fall in September, before the Jewish high holidays, traditionally a time of reflection and asking forgiveness, I decided to seek reconciliation with this individual. The person was receptive to a conversation and it was productive. I was able to let go of a lot of pain and emotion. So I would say that it was a liberating experience for me to not be in a state of silence anymore. And it allowed me to move forward.
Wow. What a cool story. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Yeah. And it must have taken so much courage. How did you make a choice to take that step to break the silence?
So it's exactly a combination of what we've been talking about so far, Ruthie, which is it was a combination of listening in silence to myself and reflection and also intuition. So I was thinking for at least 5 years, like, when am I going to seek reconciliation? When am I going to break my silence? When am I going to try to end this pain? I'm mulling it over and over again in my head, maybe overthinking. Actually, no, I don't think I was overthinking. I really needed just time to think. I can take a really long time to do some things in life, I'm telling you. But when I do it, I do it right. So,
We have a whole lifetime.
finally, so finally in September, there was like this dam that broke in me and just like a flood came out of, okay, my intuition tells me it is time. It wasn't even a choice anymore. It was an imperative. I
Wow.
have to do this.
Wow. That is just so powerful how it was your intuition and your body was really the guide. You spent so much time thinking about it, but the springboard didn't come from your thoughts. It came from your intuition.
Yes, the body and the intuition, definitely. I could feel it. It was something I could feel
Yeah.
somatically in me.
Yeah. So powerful. And it's so amazing that you also trusted your intuition, talking about silence and listening. It sounds like you really listened and followed your intuition because you could have just ignored it. Sometimes people hold secrets or painful emotions that they ignore for years and sometimes even a whole lifetime.
Yes. And I know that you've done research on that and you have a lot of professional expertise on that topic. So I'm interested to hear more of your thoughts on it.
I'm not like a huge expert on this, but when I was in grad school, I did a meta-analysis on self-concealment with my professor, Dr. Larson, and his collaborators. And it was interesting because we looked at hundreds of studies on the effects of self-concealment on physical health, on mental health, on relationships, on different areas of life. And the main findings were that self-concealment it's pretty toxic, actually. Keeping secrets and holding things in for a long time, it causes stress to the body and the mind, and it can lead to harboring and marinating in difficult emotions. I don't like to call any emotion negative because they're just emotions, but emotions that really take a toll on the body. So this can lead to different physical symptoms, autoimmune diseases, chronic pain, medically unexplainable symptoms, or medically unexplainable pain. So all kinds of stuff. And of course, not to mention anxiety and depression. We know that one of the main roots of depression is repressed anger, unconscious repressed anger, rage. And that's a really difficult emotion to confront and to deal with and tolerate. A lot of times people have guilt about this emotion or shame, or it's, wrapped up in other inhibitive emotions. And inhibitive emotions are ones that like they constrict you, they make you tense, they make you hide, versus emotions that are more expansive, like love and joy and happy. So the more restrictive, inhibitive emotions, they really do have some long-term cumulative deleterious effects on the body. And if the body doesn't feel good, we know that the body and mind are connected. The mind doesn't feel good,
So I have a
relationships
question.
can start to suffer as well. And a lot of times what holds these emotions in place is just what keeps them under lock and key is just shame, which is a toxic emotion.
Okay. So like teasing these two sides of the coin apart, silence can be healing, but silence can also be harmful. My question is, how do you know which is which? Like, how do you know, like, should you always break your silence? Like, is it always a good idea to say everything you're thinking or feeling? Or like, how do you know which silence is toxic and which one is not?
That is such a good question. Let's explore that together. What comes to mind for me is it's okay to share what's going on and share your feelings, as long as it doesn't do harm. So what the example that comes to mind for me is sometimes I hear clients talking about a family member who just says anything and they're very critical and make the person feel bad about themselves. So if somebody is doing that, then you can be like, well, I'm just sharing my feelings, right? When everybody else needs to be on the receiving end of criticism and complaints, even though it's doing damage to them. So in that case, silence or some containment of the emotions would be better. Sometimes people really struggle with containing their anger, and they can just be like, well, I've had enough, and I just can't help it. And they snap or start yelling. So that does damage. And in that case, the person who's yelling can say, well, this is just my feelings and I'm allowed to show them. But that's not true because it's at the expense of somebody else. It's doing harm to others. And I think this is where we need to make the distinction. Also, a person in a group, like one more example is if we have, let's say, a therapy group, and there's one person who is dominating the conversation and not leaving enough space for others. So in that case, reining it in and leaving more room for silence would be better as well. But what are your thoughts?
Well,
Like
a follow-up question would be, okay, that makes complete sense to me that you don't want to be sharing thoughts, feelings, emotions when it's going to harm other people.
Yeah.
Unless not doing so would cause further harm or trauma. Like, I don't know if there's a corollary, but
Yeah, sometimes you have to do a little harm for the greater good, you mean?
yes, like if someone's being traumatized, they have to talk about it. Or they don't have to, actually. I mean, many people don't talk about their trauma,
Yeah.
but is it preferable?
There's a debate about that, whether it's preferable to talk about trauma. Trauma is such a ubiquitous thing, and it's in the eye of the beholder. So for some people, talking about trauma is really important and making a trauma narrative because trauma, it fragments the self and it fragments memories. So when we can have an organized, coherent narrative about the trauma and also make meaning out of it, then that can be very helpful and very healing. However, a lot of trauma is so unconscious and so nonverbal that a narrative is not even accessible. Sometimes I see this happens in a yoga class or even in a Yoga Nidra session. And it certainly happened to me a few times where a person will just be in Shavasana and in the resting pose or in a different extended posture. And sometimes they just start crying. And when she doesn't know why she's crying or what prompted it or what it's associated to, but she just starts crying and that's a release of trauma. If the student is doing a posture where trauma is stored in the body, so if you're doing a posture where it's targeting a part of the body where that trauma is stored, and then unlocking those muscles and letting the tension or the trauma release, then that can bring on emotions as well. So it's nonverbal. So they don't need to talk about it, but afterwards they can say, I don't know what happened. I don't know why I was crying, but I feel better now.
That actually leads me to kind of a conclusion about all this.
Okay.
For now, because we have limited time
Yeah,
on this earth and in this podcast,
that is true.
especially in this podcast for today. We were talking about the metaphor of the double-edged sword of silence earlier. And I feel like a more appropriate metaphor might be that it's a loop. It's a circle. It's kind of a feedback loop or just a cycle where silence used in a beneficial way can actually serve to release emotions and trauma and experiences that were in silence in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said in the Yoga Nidra example of someone who was in Shavasana and started to cry.
Yeah.
So that productive healing silence allowed something that had been traumatic or negative that was silenced, that allowed it to be released.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeds a cycle. It's just kind of a cycle of needing to continue to do that interplay and use silence in a way that's beneficial. And then we can all benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like
What do you
that
think?
image. I like it. I like the image because that double-edged sword, it sounds a little, the sword is like a weapon.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan
Yes.
of that image either anymore. Yeah, I like the circle image better because it really does, from silence to speak. I can go in like a cycle. Actually, what's coming up for me now is the image of the figure 8, like the infinity sign, where one side is like silence, one side is speech, and then the middle ground is like that point of choice or that point of intuition. Like, where do you go from silence to speech? So it's like two circles with like this point in the middle. That's just what kind of the image that showed up for me just now as you were talking about the circle.
I really like that.
Yeah.
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 We should put that up.
Yeah. I like how we evolved from a sword, which is like a lot circle, to infinity sign.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then I guess if we keep going, we'll get to the flower of life and all the sacred geometry.
Love it.
Wow, I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I know we have our time boundary for today. So as we wrap up for today, just one more, two more questions. One is, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Connecting with me, I would recommend LinkedIn. You can just search for me by name, the name that appears in the caption. And I also have a Substack at longuistics.com. That's LONGUISTICS.com.
Okay.
What was the other question?
Oh, the other question is if you have any words of wisdom for the audience that you want them to take away as we wrap up for today.
Well, I want to congratulate them and applaud them for listening to this podcast all the way to the end. I am proud of you. Give us a like or a comment or some kind of feedback if you enjoyed this episode.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for having me, Ruthie.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been a real joy having you on.
It's been wonderful. Thanks a lot.